Hi folks, today I'm going to show you how to hatch your mop spawning killifish eggs. Now, if you have received these eggs from me, you would have received them in a little box like this. Now, I send them in a box to prevent any damage to the eggs. Now, because these eggs have been kept in a pot of water, I send them in a little test tube. So, as well as providing insulation in the box to keep the eggs warm, they also come in a little tinfoil bag like this, and this is especially useful if the eggs are being sent abroad, because sometimes the scanners can damage the eggs. Now, there's a huge debate with this on the fish forums, whether the scanners actually damage eggs or not, but I rather be safe than sorry. And I find that the boxes don't get opened if I've sent them in these little tinfoil pouches. Whenever I've sent eggs or live food through the post and they're not in these tinfoil pouches, then the boxes get opened, and more times than I care for, the eggs get confiscated for some reason. This is a point to note that if you're living in countries, especially like Australia and South Africa, you're not allowed to import any fish eggs, live food, etc. I mean, you guys will know how strict your countries are. But when I'm shipping around the world, then I put them in these tinfoil bags. Just opening up one of the bags, you'll see that the eggs have been shipped. I've got to try and figure out where the camera is. You can just make out some eggs there. Now, normally before I send these eggs, I'll make sure that they are viable. I would have had them for at least 3 to 5 days. I would have checked that they've got no fungus and that the eggs are developing before I send them. So sometimes I get orders for eggs online, and you're going to have to wait just a couple of days before you receive them, because I always check that the eggs are viable. So yes, that's how you will receive your eggs. Now, how to hatch these eggs. Now, you can use any container you wish. Now, I used to use my wife's dishes, these little dishes that you see there. Now, unfortunately, I breed killifish on such a scale that I would need loads and loads of these dishes, and my wife started complaining. So I have to use my own plastic boxes now. The reason you want to do something as small as this is so that you can keep an eye on the fry as they hatch. With water hatching, you can take them directly from the test tube into this bowl, and you won't have to remove them immediately to another container. Now, this is another type of mini fish tank that you could use. You would only fill this up maybe 1 inch or 2 inches at the most, and as the fry get larger, you can start making the water deeper, and you can then start adding a simple sponge filter. This is my camera just went flying there. Luckily for me, the lens didn't crack. This is another kind of box. This one is maybe just too big. The type I use, just because I breed so many different species, is a little plastic box like this with a lid. Now, that means I can stack them. I've maybe got 20 or 30 species going on at any time. So I stack these little boxes, and as you can see, the water is not deep. Now, some advice about the water to use. Because I've got access to a lot of fish tanks, I use old fish tank water. Now, it's important to use dechlorinated water. If you're going to use water from your tap, make sure it's been standing for at least 24 hours. And if you can get some air going through that, even better. But yes, I use old fish tank water, or you can use tap water that's been standing, and that should be fine. It's important that this water is warm. Now, I keep these little tubs up against a light, a fluorescent light, so the water is constantly warm. You need to keep these eggs at least room temperature. So don't go pouring your little vial into a tub of ice cold tap water. That's a sure way of killing the eggs and killing the fry off in one go. So it's very simple. You take your little vial and you empty it into your container that you've prepared with tap water that's been standing or from water from your tank. And just empty it out into there. Make sure all the eggs are out. That's the eggs now in the container. Now typically by the time you receive the eggs, they would have been in the post a couple of days. I would have held on to them for a few days, so you shouldn't have to wait for more than a week before the eggs start hatching. Depending on the species, it can be a lot quicker. Now, these particular eggs that I've just placed in here is Amphicemion australe. Now, they normally hatch within 2 weeks. Now, with this particular bunch I've thrown in here, I know for a fact that they're almost ready for hatching. I've been monitoring them for a couple of days now, and I suspect they'll be hatching within an hour or so of me putting them in here. Some advice about food. A lot of killifish fry are very, very tiny. So their first foods will be either Infusoria or Paramecium. Now Paramecium is slightly larger than Infusoria. Now Paramecium will do for most species. The quickest way to get Paramecium is to cultivate it obviously yourself, or you can buy a kit from myself and you will have a batch ready to go. It is also helpful if you put some plants inside the hatching bowl, because the plants encourage Infusoria to grow and they help the little fry to feel secure. As soon as the little fry hatch, they'll start hiding under the plants. So it's a good idea. As well as that, because I don't have any filtration in these bowls, then the plants will also provide some oxygen. So basically, that's it. Little tub, 2 inches of water. Make sure obviously that it's at least room temperature. Some live plants in there. Make sure you've got some Infusoria going, or if it's one of the bigger species, you can have brine shrimp ready. And you just keep an eye on them and they'll start hatching. Now I will tell you this, no matter how hard you try, to get 100% hatch rate is almost impossible. I've been breeding killifish for many years now, and even I can't always get 100% hatch rate. So if you're buying 20 eggs, 30 eggs, do not expect every single egg to hatch. Now this is especially true for killifish eggs that have been sent in peat. Now depending if it's a semi-annual killifish or an annual killifish, it gets even more complicated. With semi-annual killifish, once you wet the eggs, you leave them wet and just hope that as many eggs hatch out as possible. You do not re-dry them, because when you re-dry them, the eggs will just fungus in the peat. It's not the same as is with annual killifish. Now, annual killifish go through several diapauses. That means that not all the eggs will hatch in the first time. This is because in nature, these killifish that lay their eggs in mud, a quick rain could come, the pool fills up with water, and if all the killifish eggs hatched and the pool dries out, then that's it, they're gone, they're extinct. So the eggs will hatch over a period of months. So you might get some eggs that will hatch in the first batch, and then what you'll have to do is re-dry the eggs and try a month later, and so it goes on depending on the species. With some of them it's a week later. With eggs that have been sent in water, obviously you just let the eggs sit in the water and you just hope for the best, that as many eggs will hatch as possible. Now I just want to point out, a lot of people will be asking about pH and general hardness. As most of these killifish are now aquarium strains, you don't really need to worry that much with the fry. It depends on the species. If it's a mop spawner, generally they've just been bred in tap water. Neutral pH will do. There are some species that you will need to have a harder pH. The species that comes to mind straight off the bat is Aphanius mento. It's actually a cooler water species, but it thrives in hard water. There are some species that require soft water, but if you're buying from a breeder, he'll tell you beforehand if you need soft water, neutral, or hard water. Where it becomes a lot more tricky is if you bring in wild stock, F1 stock, but then again that the killifish breeder will inform you what you require. If for instance you're also getting eggs sent in peat, you need to find out in what conditions these eggs were laid in. But with mop spawners, generally you don't have to worry too much. As long as the water is neutral, you have an average room temperature of at least 22, you'll be fine. Now, as I expected, just a couple of hours later, some of the eggs have started hatching and the fry are now swimming around in the little tub. I'm going to try and show you the little fry, but obviously they'll be hiding in between the plants and it becomes a bit more difficult. So with Amphisemion australe, they will take paramecia as a first food for the first 2 or 3 days, and then you should be able to move on to brine shrimp after that. My advice when feeding fry is keep their stomachs full all the time, especially with brine shrimp. But when you're feeding with brine shrimp, make sure that the brine shrimp don't die in the little container. If any of the brine shrimp die, just take them out, because otherwise that will pollute the water. And since there's no filtration in these little tubs, the little fry will suffer very quickly and they will die. Now I've poured some of the eggs into a white bowl just so that you could see the fry hatching. The fry is sufficiently large enough to feed for the first day on Infusoria, and in a couple of days they will start taking brine shrimp.